3 days before my wedding, my fiancée told her ex he was the love of her life. When I found out she was choosing him, the idea of him, over me, I just vanished. I disappeared without a single trace. I was born on a Tuesday afternoon. Dad always told me we were in a hospital room that was practically falling apart because the power had been damaged that day. Maybe that little detail never stuck with me, but looking back, I realize how much it fit. My whole arrival into the world was chaotic. My mother was young and, honestly, she wasn't thrilled about being a mom. That's what Dad's stories hinted at later. He said she held me without any real conviction, like I was some forgotten item someone had dropped in her lap. I never felt her affection growing up. In fact, she decided to leave when I was barely walking, running off to start a new family with another guy. She just left. No goodbye? Or maybe she did say goodbye when I was too young for words, when all I understood were raw feelings. My father, though, he stayed. He had no clue how to handle a baby, but he kept me alive as best he could. He pulled rotating shifts just to pay for a tiny apartment and my care. He told me that sometimes he was so utterly exhausted, he'd collapse asleep in his work clothes while I sat there playing with wooden blocks at his feet. As I got older, I finally understood the sheer weight of his sacrifice. He was a man who had been completely abandoned by the woman he loved. Yet, he never broke. He never once spoke ill of my mother, but he didn't lie to me either. He just said she decided she couldn't be part of my life. One day, she packed a suitcase, wrote a brief note with cold words, and walked away toward an uncertain future. My uncles told me he cried for ages until he finally realized that if he drowned in his sadness, I wouldn't have the support I needed. I remember my first few years of school as a horribly confusing time. Seeing the other kids with their mothers always made me feel strange, like an alien. I was a shy, insecure kid, shocked that everyone else talked about mom so normally. It was excruciatingly hard for me to explain why she wasn't in my life. When I tried to say anything, I'd get these looks of curiosity or pity, and that just made me feel so fragile. I managed to make a couple of friends who accepted me, but mostly, I hid myself away in books. My father loved me without limits, but he was visibly worn out by the time evening came. He couldn't spend as much time with me as he desperately wanted, but at least he sat down for dinner and asked me about my day. As the years passed, the questions about my mother became sharp and concrete in my mind. Why did she leave? Did she not love me? My father, trying not to crush me, just said the reasons were complicated, that maybe she wasn't ready to be a mother. But in my childish head, I translated that to, I wasn't good enough to keep her. That's when I started pushing myself, without even realizing it, in sports, academics, everything. I needed to excel, to be perfect, to see if maybe, just maybe, that would finally make her turn and look at me. It was this desperate, aching hunger for recognition that I could never satisfy. Every time I did something amazing, I'd wonder if she knew, if a whisper of my success would reach her ears and make her regret walking away. This silent craving for approval and the constant need to be chosen intensified during my adolescence. When I started being interested in girls, I found it nearly impossible to approach them. It wasn't just shyness. I carried this massive, colossal fear of rejection inside me. Deep down, I was terrified that any girl I liked would eventually do what my mother did and abandon me the moment I got attached. So, my defense mechanism was to dominate academics. I became the top student in my class, won every math competition, and racked up honor mentions in high school. My dad was proud, but sometimes he'd look at me with a hint of worry, like he knew I was pushing myself too hard. He tried to tell me that my value wasn't just about my accomplishments, but about finding happiness inside. Still, I couldn't stop. I felt like I needed to cover myself in diplomas to make up for the hole left by maternal affection. The time came to apply for university, and I aimed for a prestigious one that offered full scholarships to high-achieving students. I took the tests, sent my transcripts, and crossed my fingers until my knuckles were white. When the acceptance letter arrived, confirming a 100% scholarship, I felt invincible. I'll never forget my father crying with pure joy, hugging me in the kitchen, telling me how proud he was and how he wished my mother could see how far her son had come. That might have been the happiest moment of my life. I felt like I could finally be a source of pride for my selfless father, and maybe, just maybe, my mother would somehow find out and acknowledge me too. University was a massive shift, new faces, ridiculously tough professors, and the crushing pressure to keep that scholarship. But I settled in quickly. I joined every study group I could, eager to learn and meet people with the same drive. That's where Laura, my future fiancée, came into my life. She was my age, fiercely intelligent, and had this quiet, serene beauty. She always wore her hair up in a simple ponytail and had these plain-framed glasses. The moment I watched her present a research paper, her speaking style captivated me, the total confidence with which she argued her points. When we finally spoke, I discovered she had a wicked sense of humor, too. I felt a connection with her that first afternoon that I'd never experienced before. Laura and I were everywhere together, lab projects, conferences, student activities. We'd talk for hours in the cafeteria, about philosophy, politics, art, losing track of time completely. With her, for the very first time, I felt like I could stop performing, stop trying to constantly stand out. She was brilliant in her own right, with a flawless GPA and a charisma that intrigued me more every day. Deep down, I started to believe I had a real chance to finally be loved, to be chosen without any conditions. But proposing was terrifying. It took months to build up the nerve. One night, after one of our study sessions, I walked her back to her dorm, like I always did. I stopped at the door, and with my heart hammering against my ribs, I confessed that I felt more than friendship. I loved her personality, her mind, her smile. Laura looked at me, surprised. Then she stepped closer, and without a single word, she kissed me. No declaration was needed. Her action spoke volumes. She later told me she had been waiting for me to make the first move. That moment was pure liberation. My worst fear was rejection, but she chose me. She chose me when she could have had anyone, given her talent and looks. That feeling of being the chosen one became everything to me. We made it official, boyfriend and girlfriend. We'd meet for dinner outside of classes, go to movies, and walk the campus late at night, sharing our dreams for the future. She'd talk about her plans for a postgraduate degree and her love for English literature. I'd tell her about my father, my scholarship, and my fierce ambition to build a brilliant career. During those months, the thought of my mother receded. Every time I was with Laura, I felt like life was finally fair, that someone loved me wholeheartedly. I felt so complete that I stopped obsessing over my mother's absence. Our relationship grew stronger over time. We both knew we were serious. There was no looking for anyone else. About 18 months later, I was invited to lunch at her parents' house. It was my first time meeting my future in-laws. Laura came from a wealthy, kind family with impeccable manners. They were cordial, served an amazing lunch, and at the end, praised my academic success. They said Laura looked genuinely happy with me and promised to support us if things worked out. Her father even mentioned having high-level contacts and offered to help me if I needed a boost. I thanked him, though I preferred not to rely on favors. I needed to feel autonomous and succeed on my own merit. Her family also mentioned that Laura had a complex ex-boyfriend. They described him as wild, rude, someone who didn't know how to appreciate Laura. I didn't press for details, but I was left with a strange curiosity. Later, when we were alone, Laura admitted that her ex was a guy with an explosive personality. He lived for thrills, parties, and zero rules. She thought for a while that she needed that spark, but quickly realized the relationship was toxic. She broke it off, and he moved on. I felt a knot of anxiety, thinking about this adventurous man whom she must have loved intensely at one point. But she assured me she would never go back because she realized that life wasn't for her. Relief washed over me, but the thought lingered. I wasn't a jealous person, but the idea that she had loved someone so completely different from me was unsettling. Still, I trusted her. She chose a more stable life, a solid partner, and there I was, a dedicated man ready to commit. We both graduated with honors. She was a top student, and I had the highest grade on my thesis. My father came to the ceremony. He cried as Laura and I went up to accept our medals, and he hugged me so tightly afterward. He said my mother, if she saw me, would be proud. That comment stirred up old feelings, but I chose to keep silent. Soon after, a professor's recommendation landed me a very promising role at a major consulting firm, with a salary way above my age bracket. It was an incredible leap. Laura, meanwhile, had great offers in marketing and finance. Just like that, we became a young power couple with a dazzling future. I grew more certain every day that she was my person, the one I wanted to spend my life with. My father saw how deeply I was in love, and he smiled, happy that I was finally escaping the cycle of abandonment that had defined my childhood. A couple of months into our new careers, I told Dad I planned to propose. He looked at me with a touch of nostalgia, said I seemed young, but if I was sure, he'd back me completely. I told him I needed the perfect ring and a moment worthy of her. We organized a dinner at a fancy restaurant, inviting her parents and my father. I planned a little speech, tracing our story back to college, leading up to the moment I'd pull the ring out. I was a nervous wreck. Laura arrived, radiant, totally unsuspecting. In the middle of the meal, I stood up and told everyone how much Laura meant to me, how she made me feel truly loved, how her smile brightened every morning. Finally, my voice shaking, I asked her to marry me. I got down on one knee, presented the ring, and watched her eyes fill with tears. She nodded, said yes, and we collapsed into a hug. Her parents applauded, touched. My father wept openly. It was another one of those moments that felt completely, utterly true. That night, we went home, knowing a huge event would soon unite us before all our loved ones. Time flew. We started planning a massive wedding. Invitations for coworkers, old classmates, family. Laura was buzzing, looking at dresses, booking a venue, then changing it. We finally settled on having the ceremony at a secluded cabin near a river, romantic and unique. We booked the remote location and poured time and money into making every detail perfect. The decor, the music, the food. The days leading up to it were a rush of pure adrenaline. My father was helping me with the final touches, his pride evident that his son, The little boy who used to sleep clinging to a teddy bear was actually getting married. I wished, with every fiber of my being, that my mother could see me, but I knew it was a foolish dream. We hadn't spoken in decades. There were just 3 days left until the wedding. Most of the guests, including our college friends, had already arrived in the cabin area. Laura was staying with her parents in one small hotel, and I was in another with my father, following the tradition of not seeing each other until the ceremony. I had a final, last-minute detail I needed to confirm with Laura, something minor about the seating chart or the photo session location. I don't even remember. I walked over to her hotel, but just as I reached her door, I heard her voice. The thin wood of the room let me hear her words clearly. I know I shouldn't have stayed to listen, but her tone drew me in. It was her tone, hushed and emotional, and then I heard my name. I froze. She was recording a voice message for her ex, that wild, adventurous guy, and what she said made my entire heart drop into a black abyss. She told him he had always been the love of her life. She said she couldn't be with him because their lifestyles were too different, but that if he had just changed, she would have married him, not me. She promised she would always love him, always treasure him in her heart, but she needed the stability that he could never offer. I felt a paralyzing, icy shock. My first thought was to deny it, to tell myself it couldn't be real. I tried to breathe, but the pain was physical, unbearable. I stumbled backward and ran to my own room. I collapsed on the bed, sobbing like a lost child. The woman who I thought loved me was confessing to her old flame that he was her true love, and I was just the safer, more stable choice. All the old ghosts of my mother rushed back. She had also chosen a different family, leaving my father and me behind. History was repeating itself. I wasn't enough to be chosen, not unconditionally. In a haze of despair, I called my father. I told him everything through choking sobs. He held me tight, his face grim. He asked me what I wanted to do. Confused, I stammered that I couldn't marry someone who didn't see me as the love of her life. I couldn't live as the second option. I cried, "Is that fair?" My father simply told me to follow my heart and promised his unconditional support. It was insane. 3 days before the wedding, and I was about to call the whole thing off. But a voice inside me was screaming that I had to be honest with myself. I deserved so much more than half a love. I decided I had to write letters to explain why I was leaving. I just didn't have the courage to face everyone, to confront Laura and hear her try to justify that direct hit to my heart. I wrote one for her parents, and others for close friends and family who had traveled for the wedding. In them, I sadly explained that I had learned, in the most painful way, that Laura didn't see me as her great love. I had heard her confess to her ex that he was her true great love. I apologized for the humiliating chaos I was causing, but I said I simply would not, marry a lie. I gave the letters to my father, asking him to deliver them the next day. That night, I packed my bags and slipped away. A friend helped me drive out of the area without anyone seeing me. The next day, the day before the wedding, was supposed to be about final prep. But when everyone realized I was gone, panic erupted. Laura and her family were searching for me, frantic. My father, heartbroken, delivered the letters. I can only imagine the shock and disbelief as people read them. Laura's parents, I later learned, were furious with her, demanding to know why she would confess such a thing days before her wedding. When she read my letter, she cried hysterically, finally realizing I had overheard everything. I sometimes wish I could have seen her reaction, not to be cruel, but just to understand if her regret was genuine or if she only lamented the scandal. Regardless, I was already gone. My father returned to the city and told me the wedding had been canceled. Everyone had left, stunned. I locked myself in my apartment, sinking into a deep, painful lethargy. I turned off my phone, deleted social media, and only opened the door for food deliveries. I felt a terrifying emptiness, like all direction had been sucked out of my life. How was I supposed to go back to normal? My father, with his constant love, tried to pull me out of it, saying that life hits hard sometimes, but you can't stay down forever. When my boss heard about the cancellation, he offered me vacation time to recover. I took it, because I couldn't focus on anything. I spent weeks unshaven, watching meaningless movies, trying to stop thinking about the humiliation that consumed me. After a few weeks, something inside me finally snapped. I couldn't live in hiding anymore. I went back to work, throwing myself into projects, needing to feel productive. I cut all contact with Laura and her family. I didn't want excuses. Some mutual friends tried to intervene, saying Laura wanted to talk, to explain it wasn't literal, that she was just nervous and misspoke. I refused to listen. Nerves weren't an excuse for the profound, raw feeling I heard in her voice for her ex. That truth hurt me more than 1,000 empty apologies ever could. I focused on my career with more intensity than ever. I quickly became known for my performance and dedication. Over time, my boss gave me more responsibility, and I got a promotion. My father was proud to see me recovering. I still felt a deep hollow in my chest when I thought of the failed wedding, but I tried to concentrate on what I could control: my work, my goals, my need to prove my capabilities. The only thing that remained emotionally paralyzed was my love life. I wasn't ready to let anyone in. Several months later, at an annual conference for different companies, I ran into Laura unexpectedly. It happened in the break room during coffee. She saw me and approached hesitantly. I felt a lump in my throat, but I also felt different, stronger, ready to face her. She started stammering, apologizing profusely, claiming she didn't really mean those things, that she was just having a moment of nostalgia for her ex, and that the call was just a memory of the past. She insisted that I was the true love of her life, that she realized her mistake, that she just got caught up in longing for something that was never healthy. Her lips trembled as she begged me to understand. I listened in silence, my gaze steady. I wasn't the insecure kid terrified of rejection anymore. I was a man who knew he couldn't accept emotional scraps. When she finished, I spoke calmly. I told her I didn't hate her or blame her. I understood that the heart could be divided sometimes. But I said her regret wasn't enough for me. I needed a partner who chose me absolutely. I confessed that as a child, my mother didn't choose me. Then, when I found a woman to marry, I learned I wasn't her real love either. For me, it was final proof that I wasn't destined to be anyone's first choice. And I refused to let that cycle continue. I told her she deserved to find someone she loved without having to choose between stable and exciting, and I deserved a woman who had zero doubts about me. So, no, I wouldn't resume the relationship. Laura let out a quiet sob. I comforted her quickly so we wouldn't cause a scene, but I held my ground. We said goodbye with a sad, final hug, and I walked away. I felt a strange sense of relief, like a deep wound had finally, truly closed. I realized I needed that meeting to end the chapter. From that day on, I promised myself I would never again seek desperate validation just to feel loved. I learned that while I long to be the first choice, it won't always happen. But that doesn't mean I have to settle for being the second. Love, to survive, requires total commitment, not half measures. Today, my life is peaceful, focused on my career and caring for my father. He visits often, and we talk. I won't lie, sometimes I miss the excitement of wedding planning and the dream of having my own family. But then I remember, without complete love, that wedding would have been a cage for my heart. I know it's better to wait for a person who chooses me without hesitation. I'm not close to falling in love again, but I've stopped chasing anyone's approval. If my mother didn't love me, if Laura preferred someone else, I can't change that. But I can absolutely refuse to live in the agony of begging for affection. Every morning I wake up, look in the mirror, and remind myself that my worth is not determined by anyone else's decision. My father taught me to work hard, and when the right person comes along, the one who truly loves me, I'll know how to see it without questioning if I'm the second option. Sometimes I think that whole ordeal was a test, designed to heal all the wounds of my childhood at once. I was not put on this earth to be told, maybe you are the one. I need the person by my side to know, with absolute certainty, that they choose me with their whole heart. For now, I'm focusing on being the best man I can be, helping my father, and thriving at work. Maybe in the future, my children will hear this story and understand that love isn't a consolation prize. It's a sacred bond of sincerity. I prefer to wait and build something genuine than to marry out of convenience or comfort. Everyone has fears, sure, but loving demands transparency. I know that truth now, and it's enough to face every new dawn without the weight of guilt or the anxiety of believing I have to be perfect to be worthy of love. Life continues. I move forward confidently, without resentment, but with the firm belief that I will only stay where I feel truly, fully appreciated. And if who I am isn't enough for someone, I won't waste another moment trying to convince them of my value. People are allowed their preferences, but I am also allowed to refuse to live in the shadow of another man's love. That's the final, brutal lesson. The humility to accept that I cannot force anyone to choose me, but also the strength to never cling to something that isn't really mine. I am a man who, after a complicated past, has finally understood that love is only love when both people treat it as a non-negotiable priority. I will hold tight to that truth in the hope that someday, the right person will arrive. The one who never compares me to anyone else and gives me the place I've always dreamed of. Only then will I know the wait was worth it, free of burdens, and ready for a future that will finally make me feel like the luckiest man in the world. Given that the fiancée confessed her true love status to her ex 72 hours before the ceremony, was the father right to give the son the final escape path? Or did he fail his son by not forcing a face-to-face confrontation that might have provided necessary closure and accountability? Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments.